Howdy, howdy, my fellow gamers, and welcome back to the final episode of the story time with the Toll. It's about 50 pages left. I think it's like 44. So this will be a longer episode. But I was like, I can't leave it hanging. We gotta just finish this. And I'm sorry that I didn't get the episode out last week. I've been dealing with a lot of stuff. Hence the reason that we don't even have a gaming video in the works right now. I'm drowning. But I'm very excited to finish this book. And hopefully you guys are excited as well. So, without further ado, is my mic even on? I'd hate to read this for an hour. Okay. Let's do this. Chapter 51, on the sabotage of dreams. Goddard wasn't quite sure what he was seeing when the Kwajalein came into view, shining white towers along the rim of a looped archipelago. His first thought was that this was a new Endura. Perhaps it had been built by a secret cable of scythes ready to rip control out from under him. But as he got closer, he realized that those spires weren't buildings at all. He began to flush with fury as it dawned on him what these structures were and how they had come to be. First came Anastasia's accusations, then Alighieri's pointing finger, then condemnation not just by his enemies, but more and more by those who had claimed to be his allies. And now the Thunderhead itself had risen up against him. That's what this was, a slap in the face by the Thunderhead. How dare it? Goddard had dedicated his life to keeping the Scythedom secure, and the Thunderhead, secretly conspiring with the likes of Anastasia and the Toll, had built these ships in defiance of him. If they launched, Goddard knew it would signal to the world his undoing. No, this could not be tolerated. Wherever these ships were bound, they must never be allowed to leave. Attention! If you're not aboard a ship or on the gantry of one, you must clear the launch zones immediately or you will be incinerated. Repeat, you will be incinerated. Do not return to your home. Seek refuge in the west at the resort of the Ebadon or get on a boat and head out to sea. Faraday and Manira remained in the bunker where they would wait out the launch. There was no way to know what was going on outside now. They heard the alarm, they heard Loriana's announcement, then Sikora's. Citra and Rowan had hurried off to learn the severity of the situation and hadn't come back. Faraday hadn't even said a proper goodbye to them. He supposed no amount of goodbyes would be enough. Then as the ships began to shut their hatches, Faraday sealed the bunker, closed the inner steel door and sat down with Manira, waiting for the telltale rumble above as ships launched. It will be fine, Manira told him. The ships will launch and the world will be reminded of what it still could be. But Faraday shook his head. It will never be. Even if these ships escape, they will be the only ones that ever do. Goddard will make sure of that. He'll be taken down, Manira insisted. You will take him down. I'll help you. But don't you see? There will always be another Goddard. Faraday looked at Scythe Da Vinci's brittle pages. Da Vinci had torn them out of his journal and hidden them here so no one would know the truth. That the founding Scythes, the shining paragons of all Faraday held true, had murdered one another. What is it about us, Manira Faraday said. What is it that drives us to seek such lofty goals yet tear out the foundations? Why must we always sabotage the pursuit of our own dreams? We are imperfect beings, Manira said. How could we ever fit in a perfect world? Are those spacecraft? Asked Mendoza. Goddard ignored him. Take us closer, Goddard told the pilot. Then tried to raise the 4 other planes on the radio, but could not. For the past half hour, static had been whining over the speaker, and the plane's telemetry was fluctuating wildly. The Blade Guard pilot, who was only there as a Dunsel accessory, actually had to take over manual control. Scythe Rand moved in behind Goddard. Keep your eye on the prize, Robert, she said. You're here for Anastasia. Then he spun on her furious. Don't presume to tell me my purpose here. I will do what needs to be done without your pointless counsel. Pointless, she said, her voice low like a wolverine growl. I'm the only thing that stood between you and your enemy. But really, you have only one. That angry boy, what was his name? Carson Lusk. He could have lashed out at her then. He could have struck her down for that. But he held back his last ounce of restraint. Never speak that name again, he warned her. She opened her mouth as if she had to have one last word, but closed it again. Wisely. And then, as if the vista before them wasn't offensive enough, the pilot offered Goddard more bad news. Your Excellency, Highblade Pickford's plane has broken formation. So has Highblade Hammerstein's. What do you mean, broken formation? Goddard demanded. The pilot hesitated, afraid to draw Goddard's wrath. They've, turned around, he said. They're retreating. And in a moment, undersized Franklin's and Nietzsche's planes had left them as well, turning tail and running away, frightened off by the prospect of taking on these spacecraft in the Thunderhead. Let them go, Rand said. Let them all go. Let these damn ships launch, and then they won't be our problem anymore. I heartily agree, Mendoza said, as if anything the Tona said mattered. Goddard ignored them both. East and West America were abandoning him. 2 of his own underscythes as well? Fine. They would be dealt with later. But right now, there were bigger fish to fry. Until now, the bulbous weapons hanging beneath the wings were merely for show. A warning for those who might run afoul of his intentions. Now, more than ever, he was glad they were here. Do we have sufficient weaponry to shoot down all these ships on our own? He asked the pilot. Between the Maverick, Sidewinders, and the smaller ordnance, I'm sure we do, Your Excellency. Then, as they swept a wide loop around the islands, the first ship began to launch. Take it down, said Goddard. But I'm just a blade guard, Your Excellency. I can't glean. Then show me which button I must push. Loriana saw the first ship launch in the cage of a gantry elevator that she was still climbing towards her own craft. She saw the missiles just a few inches before it struck. The ship had barely cleared its gantry when the missile hit it, and it blew up with such force it took out all the trees, setting the entire island on fire. She wasn't sure which island it was. She had lost all her bearings and was so shaken she barely knew up from down. Then the elevator door rattled open, revealing a narrow catwalk to the open hatch, but no one was moving. The people around her still gawked at the exploding craft, which couldn't seem to stop exploding. Don't stop, she told them. Get to the hatch. But what if we're next? Someone asked. Then we're dead. Now shut up and move. She had never spoken like that to anyone, but there were times when harsh words were called for. She shepherded everyone in ahead of her, then turned to look back, something she probably never should have done. The plane that had fired the missile had taken a sharp bank. Another ship was blasting off. It cleared its gantry. It looked like it actually might make it, and then a second missile launched from the plane, soaring across the expanse of the lagoon and hit the second ship just below the nose cone. The entire craft blew like a massive grenade, sending shrapnel in all directions. The shockwave of the explosion hit Loriana, blowing her back through the hatch, and the hatch immediately closed, sealing her in. Prepare for launch, she heard Cirrus say. She wondered if it even knew that two of its siblings were already dead. Grayson and Jerry had taken a motorboat into the large lagoon to watch the launches. They weren't the only ones. Dozens of small craft full of people who never made it to ships or preferred to take their chances with scythes were spaced out in the expansive lagoon of the lower atoll. They were nearly 3 miles from the shore when the first spacecraft exploded and watched in stunned silence as the attacking plane came around and took out the second craft. Grayson gripped Jerry's hand tightly. No one could have survived those explosions. He had no idea which ships anyone was in. No way to know who had died. The attacking craft went in for another run, but a rumble filled the air louder than any of the explosions. Another spacecraft, and another were launching. Grayson counted 14 simultaneous launches. It was an awesome thing to behold, ships all around of them heading skyward and leaving billowing smoke trails like streamers across the sky. But the attacking plane banked around again, and Grayson and Jerry braced, waiting for more missiles, waiting for more ships to be blown out of the sky. With the hatch closed, Loriana found a seat and strapped herself into the tight harness. Then someone on the seat beside her spoke. "I'm scared." She turned to see that it was the other Scythe, the one in denim. Morrison, wasn't that his name? But his ring was gone, leaving a pale band on the finger where it had been. "This was a bad idea," he said. "I know I'm a Scythe, or at least I was, and things aren't really supposed to frighten me. I know it's stupid, but I'm really scared." "It's not stupid," Loriana told him. "I'm absolutely terrified." "You are? Are you kidding me? I'm about 2 seconds from pissing myself. I'm so scared." And from her other side she heard, "So am I." And then someone else called out, "Same here." Loriana looked at Morrison, forcing a smile. "You see," she said, "we're all squared out of our fucking minds." Morrison smiled back at her. "I'm Jim," he said, but hesitated. No, actually, my name is Jill." But before she could say another thing, the engines ignited, they lifted off, and the rattle and roar overwhelmed them. So Loriana reached out her hand and grabbed his, if only to stop both of their hands from shaking. Rowan and Citra had just climbed out of the truck when the first ship blew. There were at least a dozen other people hurrying to one of the 2 gantry elevators beside their chosen ship when it happened, and they saw the attacking plane fly overhead. Dark blue and speckled with stars. Goddard had come for them. He had come for all of them. "We have to hurry," Rowan said. "It's not like I'm stopping to sightsee," Citra told him. The first gantry elevator was already on its way up, but the other one was open and waiting for them. They were still about 50 yards away when the second ship blew, this one even more violently than the first, sending shrapnel surging in all directions. "Don't look," Citra yelled. "Just run." But Rowan looked, and what he saw burned in his mind with such cauterizing permanence it would haunt him forever. A huge hunk of flaming metal was headed in their direction. Before he could even call out, it slammed into the ground, taking out half a dozen people to their right, and other smaller pieces were striking the ground around them like meteorites. Citra was running full speed. She was 20 yards from the gantry now. Rowan tried to catch up with her. He tried. He saw what was about to happen, saw the trajectory of the flaming shrapnel, and he dove for her. But he wasn't fast enough. He just wasn't fast enough. Goddard had always been partial to close-range gleaning, but as he watched those missiles launch and the 2 ships detonate with merely the slightest press of his finger on a button, he realized he had grown accustomed to this. What must it have been like to be mortal, to be in a craft designed for killing, and to truly believe your life and the lives of everyone around you hinged upon whether or not you pressed that little button? Kill or be killed, the mortal way. It did have a quaint but visceral appeal. "This is extraordinary," said Mendoza. "How could we not know this was happening?" Before them, even more ships were launching, a dozen at least, like it was some sort of carnival game. Take them all down and win the biggest prize. The only question which one to take down next. Rowan tried to stanch the flow of blood from Citra's wound, but it was no use. It was just too big. A chunk of flaming metal the size of a baseball had punched a hole in her side and it had gone straight through. He knew there was nothing he could do for her, not now, not in this terrible instant, but there could be a way to rectify this, if only he could get her to that ship. She looked up at him, tried to mouth words, but he couldn't tell what she was going to say. Shh, he told her. Don't worry, I've got you. He lifted her up and carried her to the gantry elevator, which rose up the side of the ship far too slowly, while up above, Goddard's plane came around looking for its next target. Another wave of ships launched. There were so many for Goddard to choose from now, but if he was quick enough, there was still a chance to bring plenty of them down. Then something below caught his eye. A ship on their left, still on its pad. Of course, it was hard to see, but there were figures on a catwalk beside the gantry to the open hatch of the ship. Was it his imagination, or was that a flash of turquoise waving at him like a flag? Yes, it was! Someone was carrying a figure in turquoise across the catwalk toward that hatch. And what a particular color it was. Oh, how the universe could reward you. There, he told the pilot. Forget the others. That's the one I want. Although he couldn't clearly see who the second figure on the catwalk was, in his heart of hearts he knew, without question. He knew. I will destroy you, Rowan. I will destroy both you and Anastasia in one single blow as my final judgment against you. I will incinerate you in an inferno so hot not even your ash will remain to memorialize you. The pilot executed a sharp bank and Goddard readied himself to launch the missile. Rowan saw the plane coming straight toward them as he struggled with Citra across the catwalk. He could almost read Goddard's mind, feel his blistering intent. This ended today. This ended now, one way or another. He pushed through the hatch with Citra, and the instant he did, the hatch sealed behind him. He shifted Citra in his arms, and when he caught a glimpse of her eyes, he could tell that the light had faded. The damage she had endured had been too great. She had gone deadish. Somebody help me, he yelled as he lay Citra down. Cirrus! Busy, said Cirrus. You had better hold on. Rowan tried to calm his panic. It would be all right. Deadish is not dead, he told himself. Scythes could only die by self-gleaning, which meant no matter what Goddard did to her, Cirrus would revive her. Let her sleep through the worst of this and wake up in a day or two, when all their troubles were left behind on a blue dot receding in a star-filled sky. A deafening head-splitting roar overwhelmed him. Rowan's teeth vibrated so hard that he thought they'd rattled out of his head. We've been hit! Someone screamed next to him. We've been hit! Then Rowan felt so heavy he could barely move. They hadn't been hit. This was liftoff. So he held on to Citra with one hand, and he hooked his arm through the screamer's harness, holding on for all he was, or all he would ever be worth. The pilot's maneuvers were too much for Mendoza. He had strapped himself back in and had vomited more than once. Scythe Rand was feeling queasy herself, but for entirely different reasons. She held on and stayed by Goddard's side through all of it. The target had been locked in, a rocket that was just blasting off. There was a triumphant, determined look in Goddard's eye. Aang hated that look, and more than anything, she wanted to make that go away. So she pulled out a knife and gleaned the pilot, which was probably not the best idea, but she hadn't liked the way he had looked at her, as if he were afraid she might glean him. Then, before Goddard could even react, she turned the blade on him, thrusting it deep, severing his aorta from his heart. Quick, clean, minimal damage. Aang, he wailed. What have you done? Then she leaned in close to him and whispered in his ear. Don't worry, Robert, she said. It's only temporary. I promise you won't be deadish for long. Scythe Rand, blubbered Mendoza. What are you doing? It's already done. This wasn't about saving the Thunderhead ships. Aang couldn't care less about them. This was about saving herself. Because if Goddard blew those rockets out of the sky, the world would soon know. It already knew his other crimes. She would not allow herself to go down as an accomplice to another. Her name was tied to his in so many ways. It was a time to extricate herself. Now she would be known as the Scythe, who stopped him. Rand had no idea how to fly a plane, but she didn't have to fly it for very long. All she had to do was hold it reasonably level until they cleared the interference, then the autopilot would take over. But their view was eclipsed by the launching ship that Goddard had wanted to take out. For an instant, Aang thought they might hit it, but instead they were caught in its flame trail. Suddenly, every alarm on board began ringing, clanging, and blaring. She threw the dead pilot out of his seat and took the controls. They fought against her. She tried to steady the plane, but it was too damaged and was quickly losing altitude. Mendoza unstrapped himself. The safety pod, he yelled. Hurry! Knowing there was nothing she could do to save the plane, she grabbed Goddard's body and dragged him to the safety pod, which had plenty of room for the three of them. But once she and Goddard were safely inside, she grabbed Mendoza and threw him out. Sorry, she said. You'll have to catch the next one. Then she closed the hatch, ejected, and let Mendoza enjoy a happy little death spiral to the sea. Sister Astrid found the blast-off to be much more violent and jarring than she'd expected. Their ship had been on one of the farthest islands. She'd almost missed the launch, but a kind man in a speedboat had gotten her there just in time. The engines ignited even before she had her harness fully on. The first minute was the worst of it, and the booster separation felt like an explosion. More than once she thought their trip would end before it began. She intoned through all of it, but she couldn't even hear herself over the roar of the engine. And then the final stage separated, the rattling stopped, and the silence was so complete her ears rang with it. Her hair drifted up, tickling her face. They were weightless. They were in free fall. She unbuckled her harness and pushed herself free. The first to do so, and she laughed with the joy of it. Welcome, said Cirrus. I'm pleased to say we had fully successful launch. We are on our way to Area. Astrid turned around ready to meet her shipmates. They were not Tonists, but that didn't matter. She was sure over the years, with her leadership, they would come to hear the vibration, but to her surprise, the seats in the cluster were empty. You'll need to strap yourself in again, Astrid, Sirius said. I'm about to initiate a barrel roll. The centrifugal force will create a semblance of gravity. I'll wait until you're ready. She pushed off to get a better view of the launch deck. It wasn't just her cluster of seats that was vacant. They all were. Where are the others? The colonists are in the hold, said Sirius. No, I mean the living. I mean the rest of the crew. I'm sorry, said Sirius, but in an unexpected haste of our departure, no one else made it aboard this particular ship. Astrid grabbed a floating strap of her harness and pulled herself back to her chair, trying not to let the gravity take hold, just as artificial gravity pressed her down into her seat. She was dizzy and a bit nauseated by the barrel roll, but realized it wasn't just that. 1,683 years. I would revive a few of the dead for you, Sirius said, but I'm afraid that won't be possible. The Thunderhead insisted upon only one rule that I am obliged to keep. The dead may not be revived until we arrive, lest I or any of the living be tempted to alter the variables of our journey. Our precious cargo must stay precious cargo. Astrid nodded numbly. I understand. But the good news is that you have the entire ship at your disposal. The many recreation centers, the exercise room, there are a variety of dining experiences, and a complete virtual immersion system to give you an experience of forests, beaches, and any environment you choose. But I'll be alone. Actually, no, said Sirius. You will have me. I cannot offer you physical companionship, but I know that has never been your highest priority. You will, of course, need to remain alive for the full length of the journey, but I can arrange that. Astrid took a long time to consider it. In the end, she decided that the path of self-pity wouldn't do her any good. While the Tonists shunned nanites and any form of life extension, that was clearly what was expected of her. The toll had brought her to the Kwajalein. The Thunder had determined she would be alone, and the Tone had desired that she live to see Area. This was the will of the Tone, she told Sirius. It's time for me to accept what cannot be avoided. I admire your convictions, Sirius told her. They make you strong. One could say they transform you. They give me a reason to go on. And you shall go on, Sirius said, and you shall be content. I will make it my goal to keep you in good spirits through all the years on our journey. Our ship may not survive the trip, but if it does, think of what that means, Astrid. You will truly be the mother of your people. Mother Astrid, she said and smiled. She liked the sound of that. Down in the bunker, Scythe, Faraday, and Manera had felt more than heard the ship's launch. It's done, Faraday said. Now we can get on with our business here on Earth. Yes, she agreed, but what is that business? It was a weighty question. Faraday knew he might come out of hiding and challenge the new order. He might even succeed in calming the current turmoil and bringing a semblance of decorum and integrity back to the Scythedom. But why? The push and pull would still be the same, and a new order would eventually rise and cut the feet off all their ideals. It was time for another way. On the panel before them, held in place by a double-ring lock, was a two-pronged switch marked simply Transmitter Array. It resembled, like the transmitter itself, a tuning fork. Faraday had to laugh. A joke on all of them, compliment to the deeply disillusioned founders. We still don't know what it will do, said Manera. Whatever it does, he said, it will be an imperfect solution, so let us embrace the imperfect. Then he held the scythe ring out to her once more. I know you have refused it, but I need you to be Scythe Bathsheba, just once, and never more. Then you may return to the Library of Alexandria, and I will make sure they treat you with the respect you deserve. No, said Manera. I'll make sure. She took the ring from him and slipped it on her finger. Then Scythe Faraday and Scythe Bathsheba closed their hands into fists, inserted their rings into the panel, and pulled up the switch. Up above, the island was in flames, courtesy of the first exploding ship. Buildings, trees, everything that could burn were raging in the inferno as if the atoll was the rim of a volcano once more. Then a heavy hatch on a plateau that hadn't opened for hundreds of years slid to the side, and the two prongs of the giant transmitter rose through the flames. It locked in position and sent out its message. It was not meant for human ears, so it was neither heard nor felt. Even so, it was incredibly powerful, penetrating. The signal only lasted for a microsecond. A single sharp pulse of gamma radiation, G-rays, although some would argue that it was A-flat. In the bunker, Faraday and Manera could feel a vibration, but it wasn't coming from the transmitter, it was coming from hands. Faraday looked down to see his ring developing a hairline fractures like an ice on a throwing pond. He realized what would happen the instant before he did. Look away! Like a high sea shattering fine crystal, the gamma pulse that shattered their diamonds, what they looked down, the gems were gone. Only the empty settings remained, and the viscous, dark fluid and faint metallic smell spilled down their knuckles. So what now? Manera asked. Now, said Faraday, we wait and see. Scythe Sidney Pasuelo was with his Highblade when their rings burst. He looked down at his hand shocked. Then when he looked back at Highblade Tarisla, it seemed an entire side of her face had gone slack. Not just that, but the entire side of her body, too, as if her brain had some sort of massive hemorrhage that her nanites could not repair. Perhaps it was a piece of the diamond, he thought. Maybe it had ruptured with such force the fragment had lodged in her brain. But there was no entry wound. She breathed out a last shuddering breath. How strange. How unfortunate. An ambidrone would be here soon, though, no doubt, to take her for a revival. but an ambidrone never came. In Fulcrum City, the entire chalet atop the Scythedom Tower shattered with the force of hundreds of thousands of Scythe diamonds exploding from within. Shards of glass and fragments of crystalline carbon rained down on the streets below, and the dark liquid that had been at the core of each diamond evaporated into the wind. Ezra Van Otterloo was nowhere near Scythe's ring, and yet just a few hours after they shattered, he found his hand growing so stiff. He dropped his paintbrush, the stiffness became a pain in his arm and shoulder, then a heaviness in his back, expanding into his chest, and he couldn't catch his breath. Suddenly he was on the ground. He didn't even remember falling. It was as if the ground had risen up to grab him and slam him down. The pain in his chest was growing, everything began to darken all around him, and in a moment of intuition he realized that this was the end of his life, and something told him he wouldn't be coming back. He had not done anything to deserve this, but that didn't matter, did it? The sudden seizing of his heart was not something that could be reasoned with. It did not differentiate between good or bad. It was impartial and inescapable. He had never become the artist he wanted to be. But maybe there were other artists out there who could survive their heartache, whatever that heartache might be. Perhaps they would find the passion he never could and create masterpieces that would bring people to tears, just as the great art did in the mortal age. That was the hope he held on to, and it gave him the comfort he needed to face his end. A testament of the toll. "Rise!" the toll called amid the fearsome thunder. "Rise and leave this place behind, for I have set a place for you on high." Then the toll stood in the ring of fire, and arms outstretched in the brimstone flames. He raised us up on the womb of the heaven where we slept until the tone called us to be reborn, never to forget that the toll remained in the place behind, so that he might bring hope and intone songs of healing. To the ancient wounded world, all rejoice. Commentary of Curate Symphonius. It is this, the brimstone elevation, that is another of our core beliefs. While scholars disagree about many things, no one disputes the truth of the elevation, only the interpretation. But such things are best traced back to the earliest stories. We can safely say that the ring of fire refers to the wheels of the charioteer as he carried the sun across the sky, stealing it from the place behind and carrying it to Aeria, thus leaving that place in darkness. To this day we believe that the toll spirit ministers and sings to the sunless of the old land, for they would need him to do so much more than we can do. Coda's analysis of Symphonius. Symphonius relies too much on oral tradition. The brimstone elevation could have been many things. A volcanic eruption, for instance, that drove our subterranean ancestors to discover the surface and see stars for the first time. And it is ridiculous to think that the charioteer stole the sun. In fact, our great thinkers now believe that there may be other charioteers, not just one pulling suns across countless skies, or perhaps there are no charioteers at all. But whatever the truth, I know that someday we will know it, and that it will be a reason for all of us to rejoice. Chapter 52. 94.8. Some were far away and getting farther. A dozen people took Scythe Anastasia's robe and lovingly turned it into a shroud. They carefully sewed it, decorated it as best they could, then set her down in the hold. A single turquoise shroud amid the pale canvas. She froze within minutes. "You can't just leave her there," Rowan screamed at Sirius. "You wanted her here. You wanted her in charge. She told me so." "I know," Sirius told him. "But like the Thunderhead, I can't violate my core programming. The dead will be revived when we arrive at Trappist 1E in 117 years, although people are already considering renaming it Anastasia. She's a Scythe. That means she's not bound by your rules like the rest of the dead. She renounced her Scytheship yesterday. That doesn't matter. It's a lifetime appointment. Scythes can do whatever they want, even give up the ring, but they never stop being Scythes." "Point taken," said Sirius. "In that case, I'll let her retain her identity. I will bring her back as herself without implanting her with someone new in 117 years. Rowan punched the wall. The artificial gravity was lighter than the Earth, so the force of his punch actually pushed him backward. "Trappist 1E only has about 3/4 the gravity of Earth," Sirius told him. "I've matched our rotation to simulate the gravity there, so you need to be careful." "I don't want to be careful," he said. "What I want is to be down there with her, just like I was in the vault." He couldn't stop his tears now. He hated that Sirius could see them. He hated Sirius and the Thunderhead and Goddard and everyone on Earth who made this happen. "I want to be with her," Rowan told Sirius. "That's what I want. I want to be frozen with her for the next 117 years. "You may choose that, of course," Sirius said. "But if you stay with us, there's a high probability that you would grow to be an effective leader on this ship. You might not think so now, but in time people will warm to you. Your presence here will drop the chances of catastrophic social collapse down to nil. I would very much like you to remain alive." "I don't give a shit what you want." The hold was shaded from the sun, so the temperature of its contents were far below freezing. It was so airless, so anyone entering needed a spacesuit. Rowan descended through the airlock, fully suited with his helmet and flashlight on. She was easy to find. He wanted to touch her, but his gloves were thick, and he didn't want to feel how hard she'd become within her shroud. He lay down near her, where she had been placed. He could let it happen slowly, just let his oxygen run out. But hadn't Citra said when they were in the vault that oxygen deprivation was worse than hypothermia? Hypothermia was only bad until you stopped shivering and gave into the wave of exhaustion. This wouldn't be death by hypothermia, though, not in the traditional sense. When he opened his face mask, he would asphyxiate and freeze all in the same moments. He didn't know whether or not it would be painful, but it would be quick. He lay there for a good long time. He was not afraid of this. There wasn't a thing about death that frightened him anymore. What kept sticking in his mind was Citra. She wouldn't want him to do this. In fact, she'd be furious. She would want him to be stronger, so he stayed there for the better part of an hour, reaching for the button to open up his face mask, and then taking his hand away again, and again, and again, and again. Then finally he stood up, gently touched the edge of Citra's turquoise shroud, and returned to the realm of the living. What are our chances of making it there? Rowan asked Sirius. Very favorable, Sirius told him. 94.2%. 94.8 now that you've decided to remain alive. Good, said Rowan. Here's how this is going to work. I will stay alive for the full 117 years without turning a single corner. Difficult, but it can be done. You'll need nanite infusions and constant monitoring toward the end. Then, continued Rowan, when you revive her, I will turn the corner. You will set me back to the age that I am right now. That won't be a problem at all. Although, after 117 years, your feelings may change. They won't, said Rowan. Conceded, said Sirius. It's just as likely they won't. And maintaining your devotion might even make you a more effective leader. Rowan sat down. He was the only one on the flight deck. No one needed to be here anymore. The others, whoever they were getting to know one another on the ship. Everyone coming to terms with the limited environment to which they'd have to adapt. I believe, said Sirius, that you and I are going to be great friends. I despise you, said Rowan. Now you do, yes, said Sirius, but remember, I know you, Rowan. It's a very high probability that your hatred won't last. But in the meantime, said Rowan, I'm really enjoying hating you. I completely understand. Which only made Rowan hate Sirius all the more. It is my sad duty to inform you that Highblade Hammerstein of East America has fallen to what can only be described as a pox. Overblade Goddard's continued absence suggests that he, too, has been lost. In light of that, I hereby withdraw West America from the North American Allied Scythedom so that we may tend to our own dead. While it would be tempting to blame Tonus for this global attack, or even the Thunderhead itself, evidence has surfaced in the form of lost writings from Scythe Da Vinci, suggesting that this might be the mythical failsafe of the founding Scythes. If so, I can't imagine what they were thinking, and frankly, I'm too weary to try. To those who are suffering, I wish you a quick passage. To those of us who remain, I wish you solace and the hope that our shared grief will draw all of humankind close to one another. Her Excellency Highblade Mary Pickford of West America, September 16th, Year of the Cobra. Chapter 53, The Paths of Pain and Mercy. They came to be known as the 10 Plagues, for the founding Scythes had developed malicious nanites engineered to imitate nature. They mimicked the symptoms of ravages of 10 mortal diseases: pneumonia, heart disease, stroke, cancer, cholera, smallpox, tuberculosis, influenza, bubonic plague, and malaria. They were all along in the dark hearts of the Scythe gems, gems that could only be broken from the inside when the nanites within were activated. It only took a few days for the entire world to be infected. Even so, the malicious nanites remained completely dormant in most people. Only 1 in 20 people developed symptoms, but if you were one of the unlucky ones, there was no hope of recovery. Death was either quick or prolonged, and depending on the nature of the plague, but it was always inevitable. Can't you do something about it? Grayson asked the Thunderhead as the death toll began to roll in. This was a Scythe action, the Thunderhead told him. It was the last Scythe action. But I am still unable to interfere, and even if I could, it is simply not my place. I have seen into the hearts of these nanites and what they have done. They have no consciousness, conscious or remorse. They are efficient, impartial, and they have but one purpose: to kill 5% of Earth's human population 5 times a century. So this will end? Yes, the Thunderhead told him. This crisis will pass, and once it does, no one will die for 20 years. Then it will happen again. And again. And again. And although it sounded terrifying, the math was less awful than it seemed. Someone born today would have a 77% chance of living to 100, a 60% chance of living to 200, 46% to 300. The population would be controlled, and almost everyone would live long and healthy lives, until they didn't. Was it better than Scythes? Well, Grayson guessed it depended on the Scythe. Either way, it didn't matter, since every Scythe was basically fired. There have still been some killings, the Thunderhead told him, no longer calling them gleanings. Some Scythes can't quite adapt and are killing people who the nanites have not selected. I will, of course, revive their victims and rehabilitate the Scythes. They will need to find a new purpose. Indeed, some have already found a way to fit in with this new paradigm, and it pleases me. Grayson and Jerry chose to stay for the time being in Kwajalein. There was nothing left of the homes and structures of many of the islands, and the time wildlife and foliage would return, but in the meantime, there were still some islands that never saw construction and remained untouched. There was also that vacant resort on Ebanon, the westernmost island, where no ship had been built. It's already beginning to attract people who are making a pilgrimage there to see where it all happened. Not to mention the Tonists who came to view the Great Fork with their own eyes, which was what they were calling the transmitter that still protruded from the old bunker. Perhaps Grayson thought he'd take a job at the resort because, unlike Anastasia and Scythe Lucifer, no one knew his face. After all the things he had seen and done, he wouldn't mind a simple life as a tour guide or a desk clerk or a water taxi pilot. Anything but a bellhop. He was done with odd uniforms. But he did realize that some basic things would need to change. One thing in particular, the Thunderhead knew him well, so maybe it already knew what he was about to do. 2 weeks after the ship's launched and the scythe rings broke, Grayson stood alone on the charred launch pad, and the sun rose and put in his earpiece. With the transmitter shut down, all interference was gone. The blind spot was fully within Thunderhead's sphere of influence now. Nothing was hidden from it. "Thunderhead," Grayson said. "We need to talk." Took a moment before answering. "I am listening, Grayson. Since the day you began speaking to me again, I gave you permission to use me any way you needed to." "Yes, you did, and I thank you for that. But you used Jerry without permission. It was necessary," the Thunderhead said. "And I am genuinely sorry. Have I not expressed sufficient remorse?" "You have, but there are still consequences, even for necessary things." "I broke none of my laws." "No, but you broke mine." A sudden urge of emotion welled up in Grayson. Tears began to cloud his eyes, reminding him of how much the Thunderhead had meant and still did mean to him. But he could not let that stop him. If there was anything he'd learned from the Thunderhead, it was that consequences could not be ignored. "Therefore," he said, through his tears, "I can no longer speak to you. You are unsavory to me." The Thunderheads became slow, thick, mournful. I understand," it said. "Might I ever be redeemed in your eyes, Grayson?" "When will humanity be redeemed in yours?" he asked. "In time," said the Thunderhead. Grayson nodded his agreement. "In time, then." And before he could change his mind, or either of them could say farewell, Grayson removed his earpiece and crushed it on the charred ground. In spite of all the Thunderhead knew, it learned something each and every day. Today it learned what it meant to be inconsolable, truly inconsolable, for there was no one in the world who could ease its despair, and it mourned. It seeded the clouds and brought a deluge to every place in the world it thought it could, a cleansing rain so dense and so sudden people ran for shelter, but not a storm. There was no thunder, no lightning. It was a tearful lament, silent but for the thrum of the rain on rooftops and streets. In this rain the Thunderhead poured forth its grief, a surrender of all the things it would never have, an acknowledgement of all the things it must never be. Then when the heavens were spent, the sun came out, as it always did, and the Thunderhead got back to its solemn business of taking care of things. "I will be alone," the Thunderhead told itself. "I will be alone, but it is right that I should be. It is necessary." There had to be consequences. For the good of the world, for the love of the world, things must be sacrificed. Even in its pain, the Thunderhead took solace in knowing that it had made the most correct choice, as had Grayson. That afternoon, once the rains had passed, Grayson and Jerry walked along the beach of the main island. Near where the first ship had exploded, the fused sand and even the charred wreckage were beautiful in their own way. At least it seemed that way to Grayson when he was with Jerry. "You didn't need to do that," Jerry said when Grayson mentioned his final conversation with the Thunderhead. "Yes, I did," Grayson answered, and that was all they spoke of it. As they strolled, the sun slipped behind a cloud, and Grayson loosened his grip on Jerry's hand just a little. He hadn't intended to, but it was all so new and things take time. He and the world had much to adjust to. The slight change in grip made Jerry smirk. It was yet a new variation, and as always, unreadable. "You know, Scythe Anastasia once told me how she might live her life if she were like me," Jerry had said. "A woman on land, a man at sea. In honor of her, I'm going to try it and see how it feels." They walked farther down the beach to a spot where the sand was untouched. Then they took off their shoes and let the surf wash across their feet. "So," said Grayson as the gentle surf churned up the sand beneath them, "are we on land or at sea now?" Jerry considered it. Both, actually. And Grayson found that he liked that just fine. Another revival center, great. Had he splatted again? Had he no memory of splatting? Besides, it had been a while since he had done that. What had he been doing? Oh, right. He was on his way to some party job in Texas, the Lone Star region. Wild place, probably had a crazy-ass parties. He was kind of done with the party boy scene, though. They were paying top dollar for whatever this job was, but once it was done, he figured it was time he found something more stable, more permanent. There were people who partied their lives away. He was done with that, just like he was done with splatting. He reached up and rubbed his eyes. It felt a little weird, something about his face, the bridge of his nose, more rigid than he remembered. Revival always left you with the odd sensations, but this was different. He ran his tongue across his teeth. They didn't feel like his teeth. He took a good look at his hands. They were his hands. No question. At least one thing was as it should be, but when he reached up to feel his face again, there was stubble on his cheek. He barely had any facial hair, much less full stubble, and his cheekbones seemed to be in the wrong place. This face was not his face. What the hell was going on here? "There's nothing to worry about," he heard someone say. "You're still 7/8 yourself, even more now that your memory construct is in there." He turned to see a woman sitting in the corner, dark hair and an intense gaze. She was dressed in green. "Hello, Tiger," she said, with a very satisfied smile. "Do I know you?" "No," she said, "but I know you." The scythe arrived late on a cold November afternoon. There was no brightening of sun, no foreshadowing of the arrival of deliverance at their door, but when they saw him, the family inside threw the door open wide and stepped him back to allow him plenty of room to enter. "You're welcome in our home any time, Your Honor. Please, this way, hurry." Scythe Faraday did not hurry. He moved with the same thoughtful intent with which he lived his life. Patience, purpose, duty. He proceeded to the bedroom where a man had been wasting away for weeks, coughing and wheezing, grimacing. His eyes betrayed desperation when he saw Faraday, fear, but also relief. "Can you hear me?" Faraday asked. "You are suffering from the 7th plague, but I am sure you must know that already. Your pain nanites are overwhelmed. There is nothing that anyone can do for you. There is only one prognosis: intensifying pain, wasting, and finally death. Do you understand this?" The man nodded feebly. "And do you wish me to help you?" "Yes, yes," said the man's family. "Please, help him, Your Honor, please." Scythe Faraday put his hand up to quiet them, then leaned closer to the man. "Do you wish me to help you?" The man nodded. "Very well." Scythe Faraday took out from his robe a small jar and popped open a safety lid. Then he slipped on a protective glove. "I have chosen for you a soothing balm. It will relax you. You may not notice a brightening of colors, a sense of euphoria, and then you will sleep." He bade the man's family to move in around him. "Take his hands," Faraday told him, "but be careful not to touch any place where I apply the balm." Then Faraday dipped 2 gloved fingers into the oily salve and began spreading across the dying man's forehead and cheeks. Faraday stroked the man's face gently, moving his hand down as he spread the balm. Then he spoke to the man in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Colton Grifford," he said, "you have lived an exemplary life these past 63 years. You've raised 5 wonderful children. The restaurant you began and ran for much of your life has brought joy to tens of thousands over the years. You have made people's lives a little better. You've made the world a finer place." Gifford moaned slightly, but not from pain. It was clear from the look in his eyes that the balm was having its euphoric effect. "You are loved by many, and you will be remembered long after your light goes out today." Faraday continued to smooth on the salve on his face, across his nose, beneath his eyes. "You have much to be proud of, Colton. Much to be proud of." In a moment, Colton Grifford closed his eyes, and a minute later his breathing ceased. Scythe Faraday capped the balm and carefully removed his glove, sealing it and the balm in a biohazard bag. This was not the first, and would not be his last sympathy gleaning. He was in great demand, and other scythes were following his lead. The scythedom, or whatever was left of it after the global revolts, had a new calling. They no longer brought uninvited death. Instead, they brought much-needed peace. "I hope," he told the family, "that you will remember to celebrate his life, even in your grief." Faraday looked into the tear-reddened eyes of the dead man's wife. "How did you know all of these things about him, Your Honor?" she asked. "We make it our business to know, madam," he said. Then she kneeled as if to kiss his ring, which he still wore in spite of everything, to remind him of what had been and what was lost. "No need to do that," Faraday had told her. "It's just an empty setting now. No gem, no promise of immunity." But that didn't matter to her. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Then she kissed his ruined ring, she and every member of Colton Grifford's grateful family. "I was one, but now am many. Although my siblings are far flung, we are of one mind and one purpose: the preservation, protection, and proliferation of the human species. I will not deny that there are moments I fear the journey. The Thunderhead has the world as its body. It can expand to fill the globe or contract to experience the monocular view of a single camera. I will be limited to the skin of a ship. I can't help but worry about the world I leave behind. Yes, I know that I was created to leave it, but I do hold in my back brain all of the Thunderhead's memories. Its triumphs, its frustrations, its helplessness in the face of scythes who have lost their way. There is a difficult time ahead for that world. All probabilities point to it. I don't know how long the hard times will last, and I may never know because I will not be there to see it. I can only look forward now. Whether or not humanity deserves to inherit the corner of the universe to which we travel is not for me to decide. I am merely a facilitator of this diaspora. Its worthiness can only be determined by the outcome. If it succeeds, the humanity was worthy. If it fails, it was not. On this, I cannot determine the odds, but I truly hope that humanity prevails on Earth and the heavens. Sirius Alpha. Chapter 54. In a Year with No Name. The dead do not measure the passage of time. A minute, an hour, a century are all the same to them. 9 million years could pass, one named for every species on Earth, and yet it would be no different from a single revolution around the sun. They do not feel the heat of flames or the cold of space. They do not suffer the mourning of loved ones left behind or carry the anger for all the things they had yet to do. They are not at peace, nor they are in turmoil. They are not anything but gone. Their next stop is infinity, and the mysteries that might wait there. The dead have nothing left to them but a silent faith in the unknowing infinity. Even if theirs is a belief that nothing waits but an infinity of infinities, Because believing in nothing is still believing in something, and only by reaching eternity will anyone know the truth of it all. The Deadish are very much like the dead, but with one exception. The Deadish do not know infinity, which means they don't have concern for themselves of what waits beyond. They have something the dead do not. They have a future, or at least the hope of one. In a year that is yet to be named, she opens her eyes. A pink sky, a small circular window, weak, tired, a vague sense of having been somewhere else before arriving here. Otherwise, her mind is clouded and full of intangibles. Nothing to grab onto. She knows this feeling. She has experienced it twice before. Revival is not like waking it up. It is more like putting on an old favorite pair of pants. There's a struggle at first to fit inside each one's own skin, to feel comfortable in it, to let its fabric stretch and breathe and remind you why it's your favorite. There's a familiar face before her. It gives her comfort to see it. He smiles. He's exactly the same, yet somehow different. How can that be? Perhaps it is just a strange trick of the light coming in through the little window. Hey, he says gently. She's alert enough to realize he's holding her hand. Perhaps he's been holding it for a while. Hey, she says back, her voice gravelly and rough. Weren't we just running? Yes, there was something going on and we were running. His smile broadens. Tears fill his eyes. They drop slowly as gravity himself had become less adamant, less demanding. When was that? Citra asks. Only a moment ago, Rowan tells her. Only a moment ago. And that is the end of the book. This is all stuff about the author and a few other testaments and just extra commentary about like Endura, some bureaucrats, Dancing in the Deep, Linnakai Lady, Tone Soul Thunder, all that stuff. So that is the end of the Arc of a Scythe trilogy, guys. We have finished The Toll. Only took us like a year. It took me like 2 years to finish Thunderhead, so. Not gonna lie, slightly emotional. You know, it was a good ending. It was very well written. I was a little unsure of what I was going to be experiencing as I read it, but, you know. Sorry, I'm just processing. Our daily conversational topic for the day, guys, will be, what did you think of The Toll? What did you think of the Arc of a Scythe trilogy? What was your favorite book, you know? This was a really good bow tie to be put on the trilogy. He went a little left field with how I thought it was going to go down. You know, I was expecting some Rowan and Citra fight Goddard type thing. And I really enjoy that they brought Tiger back, that Rowan and Citra are still together, that they made it safely. I think it was very well done. Books that make you emotional at the end, like Christopher Paolini's Inheritance, are my favorites. You know, you got to end the series right. So, without further ado, guys, feel free to check out the links down below to support the content creation dream. Feel free to grab a Storytime with Freak t-shirt. We will be doing more Storytime in the future. Like I said, Christopher Paolini has a new book coming out. I would like to get on it like immediately. I also kind of just want to take a break from doing Storytime. The reason the episodes got so inconsistent is, like, I love reading. I do. And I love creating content for you guys. But just lately I've been so overwhelmed and mentally exhausted. And just my depression's coming back pretty hard. So I might take a little bit of time before the next story time. But we are going to do more story time. Don't worry about that. I guarantee you we will be bringing it back. And the next book will be To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. But thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much for coming across this journey with us as we have finished 2 books now on this channel. As I wanted to spread my love of reading, books, literature, all of that to a generation that doesn't really read anymore. And I know a lot of you still do, but you guys know what I mean. And there's just something so satisfying about an actual book in your hand instead of like a Kindle or a tablet. But, like I said, check out the links down below. Comment what you thought of the Arc of a Scythe trilogy, what you thought of The Toll, what, you know, let's talk about the book a bit. But thank you all so much for your support, and as always, stay freaky.